Yes, welcome into the camp. We're back. For those listening, we're also on YouTube. I've said this a number of times, but in case you missed it, we're on YouTube. You can find us, putting all our episodes up there, and you can see our faces and facial reactions and everything that goes along with that. So check it out. Give us a follow up on YouTube, the Camp Podcast. Just search it. You'll find it pretty easily. We also did an interview with Hardy Watts, Wisconsin's newest commit, the 4-star offensive lineman out of Massachusetts. You can find that up there as well. We're also going to be, for the audio aspect of this, going to be throwing it here at the end of today's episode. Just wanted to get it out yesterday because obviously it was pretty new, and the timeliness of it made sense to get it out yesterday. We didn't have a chance to do our full episode until today. So you can check that out on YouTube if that's what you're into, or you can wait and listen later in this episode. But Jesse, I think obviously we should start with Hardy Watts. That was a big commitment for the Badgers earlier this week. They get their highest rated offensive commit in the 2025 class, and they didn't just do it by beating out Minnesota or a bunch of low-rung teams like Minnesota. They did it by beating out, the defending national champion Michigan Wolverines. They also beat Clemson, the perennial national title contender, or I should say college football playoff contender, and a whole bunch of other teams. It was a huge, huge get for Wisconsin. We talked about it with him, but I think it's a massive pull for A.J. Blazek and the entire recruiting staff and the entire program, to be fair.
Yeah, I think this is a big deal on a number of fronts. First of all, what it says to me is that Wisconsin can go compete against anybody for certain players that fit what Wisconsin wants. And it does matter that when Wisconsin gets in the door to build these relationships. But I would also point out that in the case of Watts, yes, A.J. Blazek developed a relationship with him at Vanderbilt, but Wisconsin didn't offer Watts a scholarship until February, which was a couple months after Blazek came to Wisconsin and was hired by Luke Fickell. So things developed pretty rapidly from there. Obviously, Blazek came up in May to watch him during the evaluation period. We've seen this under the previous staff occasionally. I think we're starting to see it a little bit more. It's not just Watts. I think about Logan Powell, the other very talented offensive lineman that Blazek got in addition to Nolan Davenport. Powell had Alabama in his final group. You mentioned Mason Posa. That is the perfect example, who had a top 3 of not only Wisconsin, but Oregon and Texas A&M, and he went and took that visit to Oregon. And with Watts, he took those other 2 official visits. He was at Clemson before he came to Wisconsin. And a lot of people thought, oh, well, if he doesn't commit to Wisconsin off of his visit to Madison and he actually goes to see Michigan, then maybe the Wolverines will win. And that's not what happened, even though Watts did go to Michigan. So I think this says a lot about what this staff has been able to do. And I would expect more of this, because now Wisconsin has 6 4-star prospects committed, at least according to the 24/7 Sports Composite in the 2025 class. And that is on the heels of 11 4-star prospects that signed in the 2024 class. 17 4-star prospects over 2 classes is pretty darn good. I know that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go 10-2. We saw what happened in the 2019 to 2021 range with those great classes. But the more you can stack players like this that are national recruits, where you're winning battles against the best programs in the country, obviously the better off you're going to be as a program in the long run.
Yeah, there are a couple things about Hardy. And again, if you haven't listened to the interview, you'll hear this stuff. But ask them, because Michigan was thought to be the leader there. They, coming, especially off his official visit, was like, all right, well, he's going to go to Michigan. He's going to end up there, the defending national champions. It all makes sense. And I kind of asked him why it was different or why he changed. And he said back home at his school, Brookline, at the Dexter School there in Massachusetts, they have a very high academic feeling about where their kids can end up. If you don't go to an Ivy, you go to a really good school otherwise. And Michigan is a really, really good school. And they, kind of wanted him to go there because that's where you go if you don't get into one of the Ivies, if you're from that area. And, I think there was pressure there, but once he got in and decided to do a little bit more work, or just a little bit more research into what Wisconsin offers, kind of felt that Wisconsin school-wise actually makes more sense for him because of the business school at UW, which is ranked so high, and the real estate aspect of that as well is ranked so high. We don't talk about academics very often when we're talking about recruiting, right? Like it's kind of like you give it lip service a little bit. I don't think it was lip service here. I think that made a significant difference for him in terms of where he could go and achieve what he wanted to do academically, because that's something that apparently is obviously important to him, and it was kind of ingrained in him based on where he grew up in terms of the private school he went to. And then the other aspect of the conversation that obviously jumped out to me was the weight that he put on between his freshman year and where he's going into now. He added a full human being to himself. I mean, he said he was 6'1", 145. I know his coach was saying he was 6'1", 165. It's kind of irrelevant. He put on close to 150 pounds or over 150 pounds in the last 2 years. That's insane. And he did it while growing 5 inches. So it's not like he grew from 5'5" to 6'6". He went from 6'1" to 6'6". And that's a very good boost. I think I would take that boost at any point in my life. But the numbers are just remarkable. And again, it's a big get for Wisconsin, and to beat out the likes of Clemson and Michigan for him, very, very big for the staff.
Yeah, a few things off that. First of all, he talked about how, and his coach mentioned this too, you can't control what your height is going to be. He didn't know when he was 6'1" that he was going to end up being 6'6", and certainly you were going to gain weight because of that, but he could control the work and the effort that he put in. And obviously, to go from, here's a freshman who is really lanky and tall, and we're going to stick him at tight end and the defensive end, to he will be your starting right tackle for the last 3 years of his varsity career and develop into a national recruit, the #1 player in Massachusetts, the number 12 interior offensive lineman. Yes, some of that is God-given, no doubt about it, but a lot of that is the hard work that he put in. So he earned these opportunities that he's received. And just from a bigger picture standpoint, a couple things I didn't address before, I think is worth noting. The job that AJ Blazek has done on the recruiting trail here in a very short time period is noteworthy. Another thing that certainly stood out from our interview was the conversation that Hardy Watts had with another coach, and he didn't name names for understandable reasons, who called him out of the blue just to tell him what kind of a man in person AJ Blazek was, a coach who didn't really have a dog in the fight and just wanted to let him know the kind of person that he could potentially be coached by. That says a lot. And so is the job that Blazek has done here on the recruiting trail. He went 3 for 3 during this official visit season on uncommitted offensive linemen who came up for a visit and then ultimately committed to Wisconsin. So he's done an outstanding job. And to widen the lens even more, Wisconsin now has 5 committed players that are offensive linemen in this 2025 class, on the heels of signing 5 players on the offensive line in 2024. So you can really see that this staff as a whole has taken on a rebuild of sorts, if you want to call it that. And there's a lot of talent there, but the reshaping of the offensive line to fit the mold of what they want for this offense in the future.
I mean, they needed to, right? You go and look at the numbers at the position; they're not high. And coming off, or at the end of this year, you're going to lose Jack Nelson, you're going to lose Joe Huber, you're going to lose Jake Renfro. Like, you have seniors that are going to be gone. Riley Mahlman could leave if he has a good year as well. So you're losing a bunch of guys you need to replace. And Kevin Haywood, what he did in the spring, being that second team left tackle. Again, I don't know that he'll end up being that guy if Jack Nelson were to go down. Maybe they would move somebody in that. We saw that in the spring where they were kind of getting the guards some work out there. But I suspect he's going to be in the 2 deep. And I think another guy who we've heard some buzz about is Emerson Mandel as well, in terms of he's not your typical freshman strength wise. He was putting up some weight last week at Squat Fest, and he's got I think he's got that type of physical ability to play early if needed, right? Like, just be in the 2 deep and potentially help them out. So it's an offensive line that needed bodies. And also it's kind of I don't know if it's a Ted Thompson thing, former Packers general manager, or, just in general, throw a lot of ammo or throw a lot of, wood into the fire. And how many hits are you going to get? If you have 10 guys and you hit on 3 or 4 of them, that's pretty darn good, right? I mean, so the more at-bats you get, the better chance you have of getting a hit. And I think that's certainly the case with what they've done offensive line-wise here, these last 2 classes, and certainly added in the transfer portal as well. And I would assume that will continue if they don't feel good about going into next year. But again, they've had highly ranked offensive linemen. They always have. And it's a matter of turning those guys into actual players, because, in fair or unfair, a lot of the guys that they've gotten, a lot of the high ranked guys that they've gotten have not ended up playing, right? I mean, Nolan Rucci never played truly. Logan Brown obviously never played good snaps. He did play meaningful snaps. He didn't play well, but like a lot of the higher ranked guys that they got have not necessarily then turned out to be really, 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 really good players. And maybe I'm having Nolan Rucci and Logan Brown on my mind when I'm thinking about that. And again, no shade to Nolan Rucci. I'm sure he's going to go and probably play at Penn State and have a nice solid career the next couple of years. But the 2 5-star guys they got, it didn't really pan out for them here. That overall class, the 2025 class, is up to 21 scholarship players. I want to ask you this question: which of these guys to this point is your favorite, or perhaps your most intriguing? Because I know you don't. You're a true journalist, and you do not have favorites.
I'm going to go one offense, one defense, and it's probably ones you would imagine. The Mason Posa one on defense obviously stands out just because if you look at the film, he's an absolute wrecking ball. The thing is, they've had a few guys like that before, and I know I've said it, like the Leo Chanels, the Nick Herbigs, and I very much feel like he could be in that mold. And then offensively, Eugene Hilton Jr., the son of T.Y. Hilton, a 4-star wide receiver. They have not gotten a lot of guys like that. And again, rankings aren't the end all be all, but they do serve as a good point of reference. And he's the highest rated wide receiver I believe Wisconsin has since Danny Davis. And that was the 2017 class. So that's a long, long time. They needed a bigger bodied wide receiver on the outside. Obviously, they have Cameron Miller committed in the slot, and they've done a really good job of revamping the slot wide receivers that they have in this new offense. But you need some of those 6'2", 6'3" type of guys who can go get you a 50-50 ball. And he put up really good numbers, had 10 touchdown catches, over 800 yards receiving as a junior. And I certainly would expect that to increase in his senior season in Indiana. But I just give me the guys that feel like big time playmakers that can come in, and I don't know if they'll be immediate impact playmakers, but I would certainly expect them to be on the field sooner rather than later. So I could go any number of directions. Again, they have 6 4-star prospects. There's plenty of 3-star guys that are underrated, like getting Torin Petaway to flip back when they've had problems on the defensive line in terms of just having impact playmakers is a big deal. But I'm going Posta on defense, and I'm going Eugene Hilton Jr. on offense.
I mean, you also then talked about every other commit as well. So good job with that.
I mentioned Petaway. I didn't mention anyone else. There's 18 other guys you've got on the board.
You mentioned Cam Miller. You mentioned
I only said he was committed. I didn't say I didn't pick him.
Okay. Either way, I'm going with a lower ranked guy, and Samuel Leteju, the 6'5", 230-pound edge outside linebacker. I love the size. I love the athleticism. I think he's still a project, and there's a lot to like there. I think there's a lot to mold. So that was outside of the guys you already mentioned. He's up there for me. And look, taking an offensive lineman isn't sexy. He just, right? Like I'm excited to see what it looks like. I'm excited to see how they fit in, but it's not the sexy pick. They also don't have a running back yet in this class. And Landon Locke is also, wasn't even the full-time starter last year down in at his school. So the normal skill positions that we talk about are intriguing in this class, but still, I think, still kind of interested to see what it actually is going to play out. Same thing with Nizai Davis, right? The tight end from Indianapolis. So I think I'm just gonna go Leteju, because I probably would have gone Mason Posa, just because you turn on his film and he's just hitting guys left and right. I mean, he's playing deep safety, he's playing around the line, he's playing on the edge. Like he feels just so versatile that he's probably my favorite. And I know he's the top ranked guy, so that is kind of maybe unfair. Maybe I'm just biased in that. But when you put on the film, it shows up, and it shows up a lot. So yeah, very good to this point with this class. How many more do you think?
Oh, I don't see many. I mean, they're pretty much close to the max. Again, they've got the 21 scholarship guys. They've got Eric Schmidt, who's the kicker, which he'll be coming on as a preferred walk-on, but then very quickly after that, earning a scholarship because Nathaniel Vakos will be moving on. So, I mean, you could count him as a scholarship player if you want. That, to me, is about the max. You certainly won't turn down Byron Louis if he will commit to Wisconsin, but I think that's going to be a challenge given that Florida State and Miami are still in the mix. They've addressed, to me, basically every position of need other than running back. And again, one of the reasons they went all in on one guy is because they signed 3, including 2 4-star guys in 2024. But I go down the rest of the positions. I mean, they got multiple defensive linemen. They basically addressed every position they needed to, other than running back, which they could afford to do because they had 3 guys signed in 2024, including a pair of 4-star prospects. So I think they really hit it out of the park in this class. Again, time will tell, but when you look at 2024 and 2025, it's going to be the backbone of this program for the foreseeable future and will help to shape what Luke Fickell accomplishes here in the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Yep, for sure. All right, switching gears here. The annual fan survey, Jesse, that you guys do at The Athletic. Obviously, last year there was a ton of excitement around the program, and it played out in the fan survey, right? This year, what do you think? Not as much? Have things changed since last summer?
Yeah, so we got 950 responses for this from subscribers, and it was about 20 questions. A couple of them were open-ended about how you feel about Luke Fickell and the team, but a lot of them were about what do you think is the state of the program right now? What are your thoughts on the job Luke Fickell has done? Chris McIntosh, a lot of other topics as well. Yes, optimism has shifted in part because last year it was the most exciting time it felt like for this program in a long, long time. And then the team went out and went 7-6, and it's just hard to ignore what the schedule looks like this season, which I thought was interesting too. One of the questions that I asked was picking what you think the record is going to be this season, and the number one was 8-4, which is what you said, and the number two was 7-5, which is what I said. I suppose the good news is we don't know anything. And that's why this stuff is meaningless, because last year when we did this survey, only 1.1% of respondents said Wisconsin would be 7-5 or worse. So I only bring that up to say we don't know anything, and maybe Wisconsin could be better. But certainly the level of optimism has shifted when you consider what has transpired in the last year. I also think maybe there might be more optimism about long-term beyond 2025, but we're entering the 2025 season, and so it's kind of hard to see beyond that right now.
So obviously, I think the fans said what was it, like 46% said that they how would rate his first year and a half as a coach. 48.7 would say good.
Yeah.
Would you say that as well?
I would say average, because the expectations are so high, and average ranked second in the voting, 37.2%. Well, the thing that I found is, first of all, people are willing to give Luke and this staff some grace and some time, because everyone realized in the last couple of years that it was not a quick fix type of situation. And the reason that I think there is even more grace is what we were talking about in the previous segment, how good it feels like the recruiting has been. And in the open-ended question about like what you feel Luke has brought here, the overwhelming number one answer was recruiting, energy, enthusiasm, all of that. The thing is, with recruiting, it doesn't mean it's going to happen immediately. So, yeah, it's kind of, I'm conflicted, because the on-field product, I don't know how you can say it's good, but if you're rating everything that Luke has done, there was a lot of work that had to be done, and it started with trying to obviously build out your coaching staff, your philosophy as an offense and a defense, but getting the personnel in here to upgrade this program. And that takes time, but it feels like they've taken steps in the right direction there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. I also thought it was, kind of interesting, and maybe it just mirrors what people think about Luke Fickell. But when you ask the question, what do you think about Chris McIntosh and the job that he's done in his first 3 years? 53%. So I guess 7% more than Luke Fickell rated it as good, and a healthy portion rated it as excellent. When I think about Chris McIntosh, it can't just be football, right? It has to be so much else that goes into the job as athletic director. It's not just about football, even though that is your cash cow. But I feel like good kind of makes sense here.
Yeah, I would agree. The numbers, again, basically every category shifted. It was a bunch of excellent last year. A year ago, McIntosh's approval rating in this poll was about 40% had excellent, and now it's 23.5%. So it's kind of pooled into the good category. But you're right, it's not just the football coach, even though that's the one that's most notable. And in the end, McIntosh's success will be tied to Luke Fickell's success, because he made such a bold decision by firing Paul Chryst in the middle of the season, which Wisconsin had obviously never done with his football program. But McIntosh also hired Mike Hastings, the men's hockey coach, and they had one heck of a first year. They went 26-12-2. They made the NCAA tournament. That was something that had fallen off. And so, I mean, I would agree with kind of where people are at with the job McIntosh has done, because oftentimes you're judged as an AD on the coaches that you hire and the success they have.
One of the bigger concerns that you would think in the athletic department is how things have affected, how the outside world is affecting people's care for football and college football in general. And one of the questions that you guys asked was, how has NIL, the portal, the new college football playoff and realignment impacted your interest in college football? And 44% said that they're losing interest. Now, again, they're doing this while answering a survey on a sports website dedicated to Wisconsin. So obviously their interest may be less, but they're still doing some of this stuff. I've seen some of the same stuff when people are talking about posting on message boards and be like, "Oh, I've lost this interest." Well, I'm like, you're still posting on a message board. So maybe your interest is less, but you still care. But should there be a concern with that 44% if you're Chris McIntosh?
Well, this is natural, and my sense is, and I can't speak for fans, but my general sense is they feel conflicted about all of this. I don't think we're at a point where people are just going to tune out Wisconsin football and on Saturdays they're going to go fishing, or if they always love the Badgers, I think they're still going to have a love for the Badgers. But where the level of conflict arises is that it's just not what it once was. You can't follow a high school recruit who commits as a junior and know 5 years later you're going to watch them develop and that's going to be your guy. And there's still those people. Hunter Wohler is certainly a good example of that, but the roster turnover is so much more frequent. And I also think when it comes to NIL and the fact that collectives are asking fans to contribute their hard-earned money to fund whatever it may be, wherever that money goes to, it's hard to kind of get excited about that every year when you know someone might just stick around for one season and then move on, because we are also now in an era of unlimited transfers. The conference realignment thing, that feels to me like less of a big deal in terms of the level of joy you get out of watching college football. I think some of the realignment that we've seen has been more exciting. And again, as we've talked about, this schedule this year is so interesting and intriguing because it is an expanded Big Ten with opponents that you don't normally get to see. And that's going to be the case moving forward. I think it's more about the NIL aspect and the consistent roster turnover. So I'm not necessarily surprised to see that many people say that they are losing interest, but I also don't think that's going to automatically mean that all those people are just going to tune out Wisconsin on Saturdays.
So the respondents also had a pretty positive view of Wisconsin potentially making the college football playoff. Now it's 12 teams. So a very healthy portion of the respondents said that, nearly 80% thinks they can recruit well enough, both portal and high school, to get there, at least the 12-team playoff. Winning that 12-team playoff, not nearly as much enthusiasm or optimism. Nearly 75%, I say 73%, said no, that they can't do that. Would you agree with both of those the majority here on those questions?
Yeah, right now, where there were a couple of different questions that got at this angle, but the ones that kind of stand out is, how likely do you think it is that Wisconsin reaches the college football playoff in the next 5 years? And more than half said likely, about 10% said certain. I mean, there's optimism that Wisconsin get into the 12-team playoff, and I think that the Badgers are sort of uniquely positioned to take advantage of this expanded playoff, because we know Wisconsin has been on the cusp, and it just didn't feel as possible, certainly not consistently, in the 14 college football playoff era. It was going to take that magical special season, which almost happened in 2017, but otherwise didn't. And in a 12-team field, you could finish third in the Big Ten. And if you are in the Big Ten or the SEC, you've got a legitimate chance. Now, the problem is Big Ten is as hard as it's ever been, but there's a distinct difference between feeling like in 5 years or 10 years, you're going to be a college football playoff team and getting to where Wisconsin has never been, which is winning a national championship. Because now you're talking about in a 12-team field, unless you get one of those buys and you're a top 4 seed, you're going to have to win 4 games against 4 of the best teams in the country, when Wisconsin has struggled to consistently win even one of those types of games. And I'm talking about the Ohio States of the world. Alabama's a decent example. I think this year will be an interesting test case. Obviously, they don't get to play the Crimson Tide very often. The last time they did, they lost pretty handily in Paul Chryst' debut in 2015. So, yeah, I think I'm sort of on board with that. Now, that's why they brought Luke Fickell here, was to try to get Wisconsin to another level. But I feel like we're still light years away from talking about Wisconsin as a legitimate national championship contender, which is a different topic from getting to the playoff, which is what I think fans expect to see in the near future.
So the just to follow up or to finish up, the expectations for this season, you guys gave them some really good options there when we're talking about what a successful season would look like. And I think the finish with a better record than a year ago is potentially the one that makes the most sense to me and perhaps feels the most likely.
Yeah, every year is different. So, like, the answer to this question will differ based on what Wisconsin did the previous year and what people believe this team has. But it's reasonable. I mean, one thing I'll say about these survey results is they feel like the fan base is at least based in reality, which is a good thing, because I don't know that you can always say that about every fan base. But they went 7-6 last year. They were 7-5 in the regular season. I think, again, it's going to be a significant challenge to finish with a better record given the schedule. But if they're 7-5 again, or 8-4, certainly I think seems to be the barometer for people to feel like, okay, this program is moving in the right direction. The other categories that I offered were be in the college football playoff hunt late in the season before falling off, qualify for the college football playoff. And then the other one is just qualify for a bowl game and sign a top 25 class, which to me is kind of like the baseline. And I don't necessarily think that would be the worst thing in the world if they go 7-5 and they've got a top 25 class, because again, this feels like it's a long haul process and you're building for the long term. But I think as a fan, you want to feel like the program you're following is taking incremental steps forward. And to me, and obviously more than half of the voters agree, it's, can you be a little bit better than you were last year and then keep building from that to eventually get to the point where you can be a college football playoff contender.
So I agree with a lot of the majority here on a lot of these questions. One area I disagree here is what game is the most important for Wisconsin to win this season? And I guess it's do you view. So it's certainly an opinion question, but Iowa was number 1, Minnesota was number 2, and Penn State was number 3. They all got roughly 23, 24% of the vote. The fourth one is Alabama at nearly 15%. I feel like Alabama would be a statement, a program statement win. Like at Iowa is probably more important for certain people, but they've beaten Iowa. Minnesota, the Axe, obviously important. You want to win that every year. Penn State, they haven't beaten since 2011. But it's Alabama. It's at home. It's an opportunity for you to put your stake down and say, we are not the Wisconsin of the last couple of years. We are moving in directions of where we can be a Big Ten contender on a yearly basis. And we're showing this with this win against Alabama. That's who we are. So I think that would just be such a huge, huge win. I don't think Wisconsin's going to be in contention for the Big Ten. So when I think about Iowa and I think about Minnesota and I think about Penn State, I understand their conference games. I understand there's 2 rivals there and you don't want to lose those trophies. And this is very, very close for me, but Alabama would be a program statement. It would be just an absolute statement win for Luke Fickell to be able to hang his hat on and say, look, this is working. We're moving in the right direction. And I think that would just be a huge one, even though it's not a conference game.
I was surprised how close the voting was here. Iowa won, ranked number 1, 231 votes. Minnesota was second at 219 votes. And Penn State was third at 218 votes. What it says to me, obviously, is that no matter the changing landscape of college football and realignment, the big rivalries that matter to Wisconsin fans or have mattered for decades still matter. And maybe some of this has to do with the fact that Iowa has been a good program and has beaten Wisconsin the last 2 years. And that's not something that has happened in more than a decade. The Minnesota rivalry is what it is. Paul Bunyan's axe, PJ Fleck, all of that. A little surprised that Penn State was third, just because it's not a natural rivalry. It's obviously a major program. And maybe some of that does have to do with the fact that Wisconsin hasn't beaten the Nittany Lions in a while. I can understand why those are the top 3 because they're conference games. But purely, like, I don't disagree with you. Beating Alabama would be the moment that kind of puts Wisconsin on the map in a way that the Badgers just aren't right now from a national perspective. And I get that it doesn't have an impact on the Big Ten conference race. But to your point, Zach, I don't necessarily think a lot of people believe the Badgers are going to be in the conference championship hunt late in the season. So really, it was a fascinating set of responses that I think just says a lot about the fan base and what they believe matters. I don't think it's a bad thing that Iowa and Minnesota are 1 and 2, because those are still the big rivalries and the ones that are protected. And there's a reason why those are going to be the teams that Wisconsin continues to play every year.
Yeah. Again, I also think if you beat Alabama, you have a pretty darn good chance of winning some of those other games later in the year against Minnesota and Iowa and Penn State. Like, that just means you're a good team. And you feel good about those other games if you were to somehow beat Alabama. But again, we'll see how it plays out. There's still a month and change, or 2 months to go here before, well, less than 2 months to go before Wisconsin opens the season against Western Michigan, and a whole lot of fall camp to to take place and see how everything plays out for them. Moving on here, your colleagues at The Athletic listed X factors for each Big Ten team. I think there were 3 authors that put this thing together. You were not among this voting group, so I'm not going to hold you to this, but they chose Chez Mellusi as Wisconsin's X factor. Would you agree with that choice?
So I was consulted on this.
Okay, at least you were consulted on it.
Yeah, I was. I went for the obvious answer first, and what I said was Tyler Van Dyke, because it's the quarterback of the team that we project will start. Now they haven't named a starter, and it's obviously between Van Dyke and Braden Locke, but as this offense, I mean, as the quarterback goes, so goes this offense. Like, there was so much excitement about Tanner Mordecai last season, and he did so many good things for the program. But from a statistical standpoint, it didn't meet where people thought it was going to be. I just think the potential is there with Van Dyke for all the reasons we've talked about. The ACC Rookie of the Year 3 years ago, the fact that at that time he was projected to be a first-round NFL draft pick, and then the wheels kind of fell off. He went 15-13 at Miami as a starter. He got benched on multiple occasions. He's dealt with injuries. If he can be the guy that he was in 2021, which is what everyone is hanging their hat on and hoping, then this completely, I think, changes what is possible for this offense. So it's the easy answer. It's the simplistic answer, but I don't know how you can say it's anybody other than him. I could get cute and try to name another position and say, oh, well, if James Thompson Jr. has a all conference type of season, but like that, I mean, no, the quarterback has the ball in his hands on every play. And if Van Dyke can be a top 4 quarterback in the Big Ten this season, it's to me, it would change everything for the offense, because they do have a lot of really quality pieces around them, including Chez Mellusi.
So they consulted you and then just disregarded what you had to say.
I went Van Dyke, and then I think that I was asked about, is there anybody else? And I said, okay, well, Chez Mellusi makes sense because he was such a good fit for the offense last year, and then he got hurt. What will that look like if he's actually healthy for the first time in 4 seasons at Wisconsin, and he's 1,000-yard plus rusher? Whatever. It is what it is. I mean, you could pick any number of players, but to me, it's the quarterback. And I will say, going back to the survey thing, the other open-ended question that we had, in addition to something about Luke Fickell, was kind of like, what's your biggest question about the football team this season? And without a doubt, the number one answer was quarterback. Quarterback play, consistency of quarterback play, the offense in general. And that, to me, is why it's the X factor, because you don't know. And that is what will make or break, to me, the season.
I mean, figuring out the quarterback spot has been a thing at Wisconsin for how long, right? Like, they constantly, it's been that way since probably 2012. Like, just can you find the quarterback to go along with all these other things that work really well? And for the most part, outside of a season or two, it just hasn't. And so, yes, if Van Dyke can be that guy, the offense stands a lot better chance to improve on 23 points a game, which they obviously desperately need to do. Chez Mellusi makes sense. I also think I really like Tyree Walker, and we've heard, some rumblings about the young guys too, about how, potentially they could play early here in their freshman year. Darian Dupree and obviously Dylan Jones, and we already saw Gideon Atuka. There's certain guys that, maybe they force their way into a spot. And so, yes, Chez Mellusi is important because of the explosiveness that he brought to the team last year, and they missed him significantly. But they missed him because they didn't have anybody behind him to fill in. I feel like they have some choices this year, some good choices this year to fill in. And that's no shot at Jackson Aker. That's no shot at Cade Giacomelli. I just think there may be some more dynamic players in that room this year than were last year. But Chez Mellusi is certainly the start of it. Speaking of Tyler Van Dyke, he ran, when we talked to Brady last week, him running 20 plus miles per hour at 230 pounds or whatever he is. Tyree Walker mentioned it when we got to talk to him after Squat Fest last week. And he said he came in expecting Tyler Van Dyke to be a statue, essentially. Like that was the perception that he got. And it has been the farthest from the truth. And so if he can stay healthy, especially lower body wise, which has not obviously been something, which has been an issue for him, right? Like he's dealt with some injuries during his time. If he's healthy, he can be I'm not going to use the word dynamic, but certainly a change up for them in the run game that we kind of saw in the spring as well. So Chez Mellusi, certainly you can't really knock it. You can't sit here and say, oh no, there's no way he's the X factor. I think just we potentially would have gone a different direction. And the quarterback always is the one that kind of makes sense for us. Moving on here, EA Sports college football game coming out here in a couple of weeks. God, that sounds so good. That sounds so amazing. I'm not going to lie.
Will you wait in line? Have you pre-ordered it?
Well, I don't need to. I can just download it right off of. I've not pre-ordered it on PlayStation yet, but I probably will, so I can get it because you can get like 3 days early if you get like this bundle. So I'm obviously going to do that because I don't have the patience to wait an extra 3 days to play. But and also, once I think it's like the 16th, maybe the 17th that it comes out. Fall camp or, Big Ten Media Days and then fall camp right after that starts pretty quickly. Ooh, that gives me an idea for Big Ten Media Days. Maybe sit down and play some video games with the guys at the table. Big Ten Media Days.
You going to bring it with you?
I might do it. I feel like there's some content opportunity there watching some of these guys play as themselves. I just don't know if I'll have the time. That might be the problem. Either way, EA is putting out their rankings. We talked about the toughest stadiums thing last week. They've done the top offenses, top defenses, and top overall as well. Very bullish on the Badgers overall. Offensively, not in the top 25. Defensively, they were in the top 25, but they're also ranked. They have a rating of 87, which is tied for 16th. Is that too high, too low, or just right?
Even our writer who put this story together said that it was
too high.
Yes. I tend to agree because unless you believe Wisconsin enters the season as a top 20 team, I don't know how you can come to that conclusion. On the other hand, if you're a Badgers fan, it'll make it a whole lot more fun to play as them because they'll be more competitive in the game. So none of this stuff really matters. It's fun because it's July and June, and that's why EA's been rolling out all these ratings basically every day or multiple times a week. So we have something to talk about, which is great because it makes for a segment here. I do think, though, that it feels like nobody really has Wisconsin in their way too early rankings as a top 25 program, but I feel like they can be on the cusp. And again, all it's going to take is a win against Alabama to put everyone on notice. And they will be not only in the top 25, but potentially the top 15, given where we think Alabama is going to start.
I don't even know if it's a win against Alabama. I think it's staying close with Alabama, like giving them a game. People will view Wisconsin differently if that ends up being the case. Now, if they go out and lay a stinker against Western Michigan or South Dakota, then we're in a different spot. But we are not going negative. I'm not going negative today. I'm going to go positive and be like, oh, maybe EA knows something we don't. Maybe EA thinks that they're going to be better than they are. It was hilarious in talking to those guys last week at Squad Fest, kind of asking about, are they going to play? And they're like, oh yeah, hell yeah, we're going to play. But they're also a little worried about their rankings and about their what they're going to be like. And like Bryson Green wants to be in the 80s. I don't know if he's going to be in the 80s. Tyree Walker's like, I'm really worried about it because, coming in here from Oklahoma, like there's a walk on there, and it's what's it going to be, and like and I'm like, what's a fair ranking? He's I want to be in the 80s, and it's just like, guys, I don't think they can put everybody in the 80s. If they're putting everybody in the 80s, Wisconsin's going to be a lot higher than 87 overall. Either way, it's exciting getting to that. We're getting close. We're getting close to having a football or having a college football game for the first time in 11 years. So really excited about that. The other one more thing before we get into our biggest what ifs of the last 35 years, number changes, Jesse. A couple of guys that I've seen. They've been posting their pictures. I think they had the photo shoot last week. A lot of guys putting stuff out on Instagram. Two guys stood out. The first one, Jake Chaney. He's going from 36 down to 1. The other one, Vinny Anthony, going from 86 to 8. There are a number of other opportunities for guys to go into the single digits, but I'm just going to say this right now. Vinny Anthony took like a half a second off his 40-yard dash with just the number change. And he's a fast guy already, but just on that fit alone, he's already faster. And Jake Chaney, holy hell. I mean, the guy may be the best linebacker in the country going from 36 to 1. They just look so good. I love single digits. I love single digits on guys. They just look so much better. Like Brandon Williams went from 25, he was a pretty good player, down to 1. One of the better receivers in Wisconsin history. Leo Chanel, 45 to 5. Off the charts good as a junior and gets drafted, now a 2-time Super Bowl champion. Jonathan Casillas, 46 to 2. He was just a different player. He just looked better in single digits. I don't know how you feel about it, but he just looked better in single digits.
I have no feeling about this whatsoever, but I'm really glad that this is something that you've investigated so thoroughly. And I'm appreciative of it. And so I guess we'll find out whether Chaney and Anthony have breakout seasons. But clearly, based on past history, it seems that things are headed in the right direction for both of them.
So yes. And there are also there are some other opportunities for guys to take numbers, right? Number 1's taken by Ches and Jake Chaney. Number 2, Ricardo Hallman. Nobody on offense has number 2 that we know of. It's a possibility that we'll have a 2 on offense. Tyree Walker has number 3. No number 3 on defense. I think that was TJ Bowlers the last few years. So no number 3. 4 is fully taken. 5 is fully taken. Will Pauling has 6 on offense. Number 6 on defense. Could we see somebody different? Perhaps we could. Jaheim Thomas has 7 on defense. Nobody on offense. 8 and 9 are both fully taken with Vinny Anthony and Leon Lowry at 8 and Bryson Green and Austin Brown at 9. But there are some opportunities here. For guys to look even better than they already do with single digits. I mean, it's just, you get a new lease on life when you go from a double digit down to a single digit. I'm just saying. All right, let's get into this, a big picture here, Jesse, in terms of some of the biggest what ifs in Wisconsin football. It is that time of year. It's early, I guess you'd say late June, early July, before Big Ten Media Days, before fall camp gets going. We have some opportunities to talk about things we probably wouldn't talk about in the middle of the season, and that is looking back and thinking about what could have been. So I asked you for some of your biggest what ifs for Wisconsin football in the last 35 years.
Yeah. We could go any number of directions. The first thing that came to mind, since we're going back 35 years, is because it could be good, it could be bad. What if Barry Alvarez said no? What if Barry Alvarez had listened to Lou Holtz? And I went back and looked at back in 2015 to commemorate the 25-year anniversary of Barry's first team. I did this really long oral history for Fox Sports Wisconsin and talked to like 49 people about it.
It was fantastic, by the way. I don't know if it's still sitting out there somewhere to be able to read, but
yeah, it's not. It's like I tried to find it, and there's like 1/100th of it somehow is still on the website. I don't know what happened, but I talked to Lou Holtz about it, and he said that he actually asked Barry, like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" He said, because I told him there were better jobs out there if he just waited. And obviously Barry had a ton of confidence. And when I was talking to Barry about it, he said he felt like it was a perfect fit. We know all the stories, but just if we're asking what if, man, what would have happened if he was like, nah, I'm cool being the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame for another season and waiting for a so-called better job? Who would they have gotten? Obviously, we know they interviewed a few other candidates. I think Don Nealon from West Virginia was among them, but he was not interested. So it would have changed the course of history. And to me, is the single biggest what if, just because of what Wisconsin football has become since then.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a big one. I would say 4 years later, 1993. What if they beat Minnesota?
Yeah.
At that point, I think they're national champions. Like, I think they could have a claim to be the national champion. There was not an undefeated national champion that year. There was every team had at least one loss. Wisconsin, they were 9-1-1 going into the Rose Bowl. They obviously finished 10-1-1 that year. If they don't lose to Minnesota that year, they are 10-0 11-0-1 heading into the Rose Bowl. They beat them. They're 11-0-1. I think they're national champs. And what does that do for the program? Like, obviously, winning the Rose Bowl is nice. I think they finished like 6th or 7th in the country that year. But if they're number one, it just, I think it maybe shoots the trajectory of the program just into a completely different stratosphere. Because you think about the next year, they were supposed to be really, really good the next year. They weren't. They did obviously win a New Year's Day bowl game, but then 95 happens, and then it took a little bit to get back to being a Big Ten contender in 98 and 99. But you just think about what could have been had they won that Minnesota game, which was a shootout. But Darrell Belleville threw for a ton of yards. I think it was like 423 yards, but he also threw 5 interceptions. It just wasn't Wisconsin football. I remember talking with Barry about that last year because it was the 25th anniversary of that team, and the 30th anniversary of that team. And I think it's not a regret by any stretch, but like it's certainly it's a huge what if.
Every game has its own what if. I thought about what if in that first Rose Bowl against UCLA, the quarterback Wayne Cook doesn't scramble and run at a time, and what if they have one more play and somehow beat Wisconsin? Would that change how people felt if the Badgers had this great season but didn't win the Rose Bowl? Maybe slightly, and maybe it wouldn't have changed the fact that they came back and won back-to-back Rose Bowls. What if Ron Dayne didn't come to Wisconsin? They've always had good running backs, but he sort of set the standard for what everyone was going to think about with Wisconsin football moving forward, just because he did it at such a high level. So every year has those, but obviously some are bigger than others.
Definitely. A few more for me. 2011. I go to 2011. And what if J.J. Watt stays?
Yeah.
What if J.J. Watt doesn't go to the NFL? He stays, and Wisconsin's defense has maybe some more pressure on a quarterback instead of allowing him to sit back there and throw Hail Marys on back-to-back weeks. But just you think about a solid defense, not even a great defense, a solid defense to go along with that offense. Man, could have been special. And I think that for me in the last, I guess now 13 years, is at the top for me, just because that offense was just so ridiculous, and the defense just couldn't finish. There were opportunities, they just couldn't finish, and to lose 3 games with Russell Wilson as your quarterback and all those NFL players on the offensive line and in your skill positions, just a huge missed opportunity.
It's a fun hypothetical. I did a what if story several years back, and that was on the list. And of course, it makes no sense because JJ was a first-round pick, became a 3-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year. But man, you're right. And that was my first season on the beat, 2011. And the idea that a team with that good of an offense could somehow lose 3 games is absolutely preposterous. But yeah, the next one for me, and this is sort of like deep in the weeds, but man, what if Joel Stave would have just been the starting quarterback to open the 2014 season? It probably wouldn't have changed the fact that Wisconsin lost 59-0 to Ohio State. But I look back at that and think, man, the Badgers should have been undefeated during the regular season. They lost to LSU because Tanner McAvoy was 8 for 24 and threw for 50 yards and was just awful. And then obviously they lost that game at Northwestern when somehow Joel Stave came back because McAvoy was ineffective. I just feel like that's a team that could have been 12-0. And what if Melvin Gordon had been allowed to play a 4th quarter? Would the record still stand? I'm pretty sure it would, because he would have run for 600 yards and no one would have ever touched it against Nebraska. Like that was such a bizarre and fun season. And that is one that stands out to me.
Joel, you go back to 2012 too. What if Joel Stave doesn't break his collarbone? They were playing better football at that point. And what if Brett Bielema allows him to have the 2-minute drill against Nebraska instead of going back to Danny O'Brien for some reason he was better at it during practice. That's why he deserved it. But you go back to the next 3 games with Joel Stave at quarterback, it was wins against Illinois, at Purdue, and against Minnesota. And they put up 30 plus points in every single one of those. And then he gets hurt against Michigan State and save for the Indiana game. And I guess Nebraska too, the way that they just ran the ball down their throat. They lost 3 games in overtime. And could Joel Stave have been the difference in those games with actually having a quarterback that you could count on to throw the ball around, right? Michigan State was in overtime. Ohio State was in overtime. At Penn State was in overtime. Like, that team was extremely, extremely talented. And if they could have just had a serviceable player at quarterback, I feel like they would have won some of those overtime games, and maybe not backing into the Big Ten championship game like they did, because Penn State and Ohio State were both ineligible to play in it. But yeah, that certainly stands out as well. 2000. What if the shoebox suspensions don't happen? What if they don't have to stagger those games early in the season, and they have a chance to build, right? They played Western Michigan, they played Oregon, they played Cincinnati, a chance to build into the Big Ten season. And they lost 4 games that year. So it's not like they were a win away, but 3 of the losses, one was that an overtime loss to Northwestern, 47-44. Then they also lost at Michigan the following week by 3. And a couple of weeks later, lost in overtime against Purdue. They also had Ohio State in the mix there as well, and lost that game at home. But what if those don't happen? What if they allow you to build? Barry has continued to say, and has always said, that was his most talented team, and it's hard to disagree with that. If they just had been able to build as a team throughout the entire year, maybe some of those games go their way, and maybe that season finishes at a much higher level than it than it ended up doing, because they were a top 5 team in the country that year to start, and just couldn't make it, I guess work. But a lot of what ifs. Any more come to your mind at all?
2017 is a big one in the Big Ten championship game. Just what if there wasn't a holding call? I mean, they're at the 41.
What if they call pass? What if they call pass interference on that?
Yes,
like, you could, to not, if you don't throw the flag for pass interference, okay, but you can't call a hold.
Yeah.
Like, in that scenario, if you're going to call it tight, you got to call it tight both ways, and they did not do it. And also in the Rose Bowl too, the offensive pass interference against Danny Davis in 2019, the 2020 Rose Bowl, I guess, but getting called for that on what would have been a conversion as they were trying to go down and win that game. But sorry, go back to 2017. That they win that.
Yeah.
They're in the playoff.
It changes a lot of things, because Wisconsin's kind of always been the bridesmaid, never the bride when it comes to the national championship conversation. And of course, they were at a level for so long that a lot of teams would envy. But if the goal is to win a national title, you got to put yourself in a position to actually get there. And they were right there. And obviously, really have not been close since. The 2019 team was pretty solid, but that was still a team that lost 4 games. I mean, I don't know. What if the pandemic never happened? Let's just get real existential on this. Or what if half the team didn't get COVID that year? Because Graham Mertz had the single greatest game by a quarterback I think I've ever seen at Wisconsin, considering it was his first career start. Then obviously things were downhill ever since then. Maybe if there's no pandemic, maybe Paul Chryst is still the head coach. I have no idea. I'm really getting out there right now, but that's what's fun about the what if topic.
What if Jim Leonard's named head coach?
Yeah.
Like, how different does this look? And there have been talks about, like, who the offensive coordinator would have been. I think we've talked about this, that before he ended up at Colorado, former tight end Sean Lewis, who was the head coach at was it Akron or Toledo?
Kent State.
Neither one of them. All right, but they were in Ohio, so I got that right. Kent State, and he obviously went and ended up at Colorado and was the scapegoat for Deion Sanders in the second half of the season. Now he's the head coach at San Diego State, but there were thoughts that he was going to be the guy at Wisconsin as the offensive coordinator, and you just wonder what that would have looked like with Jim Leonard continuing to run the defense. And gosh, Bobby April probably sticks around as defensive coordinator, and you don't have as much turnover. I think it's a huge what if. I do, like, we'll see how this all plays out. But when you think about the excitement around the program and some of the juice that they've gotten recruiting wise, could they have gotten that had they stayed with Jim Leonard?
It's it's a hard question to answer. I think there would have been a short-term boost. Again, they recruited pretty well. I think some would wonder how good of a recruiter Jim Leonard was when he was in his role as an assistant. But I also think part of your job as a head coach is to delegate authority to other people, just as Luke Fickell has done with, say, Pat Lambert and Max Steiniger. You have this department of people who are so passionate and invested and talented that they can get you those players. It would just look totally different. And that's why it's impossible to say, like, they overhauled the offense and they changed the defense in ways that mean you go and get different players. Now you're also able to attract players who might not have otherwise considered Wisconsin. So I don't know, but I do think that we would have seen a dramatic shift in the offense had Leonard stuck around, because it was very clear that what they were doing was no longer working.
Yeah. One more before we go. 2010. Going back to 2010, what if the college football playoff exists and you're not waiting a month, like 5 weeks between games, which is what Wisconsin did at the end of that season. They were playing better than anybody in my mind at the end of that season, or as good as anybody in college football at the end of the season. And then when they went and played TCU 5 weeks later, it was certainly not the case. You just wonder if maybe the season had gotten pushed back a little bit, and then you bring the playoff games up a little bit. I know like the 4-team playoff is a little bit different, but if the 12-team playoff was in place and you have, those home games like just 2 weeks after you're done playing, or whatever it's going to end up being. I don't remember the exact dates on it. Maybe it's 2 or 3 weeks. Either way, that 2010 team was good enough to play in a national title game. I mean, the offense was scoring 40 plus. The defense was pretty darn good with JJ Watt and the like. Who knows? Again, that's why they're what ifs. And I'm sure we'll have even more here as the Luke Fickell era continues on, and we'll see how it plays out. Jesse, we will be back next week, but I hope you have a great 4th of July. A little bit longer episode for everybody if you're driving around. And again, we're going to be putting the Hardy Watts. If you're listening to this podcast wise, we're going to be putting the Hardy Watts interview coming up here in just a second. Yeah, Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.